And in pure Dimas fashion, he's going for gold. His third attempt, it's do or die for Dimas. 207.5 kilograms on the bar, 457 pounds.
Struggled with the cleans.
For those of us watching back in 2004, this was an extraordinarily tense and potentially historic moment as Pyrros Dimas, one of the greatest weightlifters of all time, went for gold on the final attempt in the final competition of his career. If you know anything about Dimas, odds are you already know what happened here. If not, let's save you the stress of all this suspense.
Too much weight. And the dream ends for Dimas.
Dimas's failure to win gold in 2004 was still his apotheosis to the pantheon of weightlifting gods. He'd already won 3 Olympic gold medals, and winning a bronze here in Athens makes him the most decorated weightlifter of all time. For many Greeks at home and abroad, he became more than a national hero. He became a national treasure who helped usher in a modern era of athletic glory. When Dimas was first crowned Olympic champion in 1992, it had been nearly 90 years since Greece had won a weightlifting gold medal and 12 years since they'd won any gold at the Summer Games.
He's part of us. We feel very close to him, even if we don't know him.
But his fame goes far beyond Greece. For weightlifters everywhere, Pyrros Dimas' exploits were and are of almost mythic proportion.
He's a legend. He's a living legend.
I grew up watching Dimas. I recorded the 85 session and Azanidze won, and I remember Dimas was his 4th Olympics. I was like, dude, we'll have 4 Olympics. I remember recording it on little VHS. After that, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to compete there.
I didn't know who he was before last year.
Okay.
Nork told me to take a picture with that guy, so I took a picture with him.
Okay, so maybe not every weightlifter is familiar with him. I suppose that's how it is in any endeavor. There are always going to be new athletes, new faces, new names, and new targets for a new crowd. Fame and glory are fleeting, and no one can carry the torch of victory forever. But Dimas' name still resonates in the sporting world. And his is a story that would make any resident of Mount Olympus proud. You don't win 4 Olympic medals without an extraordinary combination of talent, hard work, and luck. So how does one reach this level of greatness? How do you go from communist-era southern Albania to a figure who embodies the ancient Greek ideal of athleticism? And furthermore, what do you do afterward? Let's go back before the Games in Athens. Before the world records, before the first Olympic gold in Barcelona in 1992, and long before a small group of us flew out to rural Greece, really rural Greece, to meet and spend time with Dimas. Before all this, there was just a young kid in southern Albania with a goal that had absolutely nothing to do with weightlifting.
I was at school and had just finished classes, so I was outside in the schoolyard. Nearby was a house that had a big tree filled with fruit. I was already quite a strong boy at this time with strong legs. It was April and it was already very warm enough that I was in shorts. So I was climbing on a wall nearby, trying to get the fruits in the tree to eat them. By chance, my future weightlifting coach passed by on a bicycle and saw me trying to get the fruit. When I saw him, I started running because I thought he was the owner of the house. He came after me on his bike, and when he caught me, he said, "Would you like to do weightlifting?" I was scared, and I said, "Why?" He said, "I see you have strong legs. You're in good shape to do weightlifting, and I'd like you to be on our team. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yes." And that's how the whole story began.
Let's consider that for a moment. One of the greatest careers in the history of weightlifting started because it was a hot day and a young kid wanted some fruit to cool off. For all the talk of sports factories and athlete selection procedures and legacies, it's both refreshing and terrifying to think of the role of luck here. What if it had been raining that day? What if Dimas decided to sit in the shade instead? What if his coach's bike had a flat tire? There was nothing prior to that encounter, which took place when Dimas was just 7.5 years old, that suggested he'd become a weightlifter. He was born to ethnically Greek parents in Himara in southern Albania on October 13th in 1971. At that time, the country was officially the People's Socialist Republic of Albania.
My father was an economist. He had a very good job and was lucky enough to work as an economist in the National Printing House of Books in Albania. This gave us access to books so we could read poetry and stories and the like. At this time, I was very fortunate to have access to any books at all, which is extremely important. Of course, the books printed at this time were those that were decided by the regime. So it's not like you could get any book you wanted. In short, they published only what they wanted to publish. But still, it was very important for a child to at least have access to books and knowledge. My mother was from a family of 8 children. In those days, when she was a child before the dictatorship, my grandfather had his own sheep and olive trees. In these times, children worked together with their parents. So from a very young age, 8 years old, she had to work hard, helping out her family with food, with animals, and so on. This is how families functioned in those times. She didn't have the opportunity for academic studies, but she worked very hard as a baker, which was an extremely hard job at the time. She was a weightlifter herself, you might say, since at that time there were no machines, so carrying 80-kilo sacks of flour and making pies was almost like weightlifting. She always made the best pies, and even today, her pies are still the best.
Next time.
Homer, the Odyssey, Iliad, these stories come alive in the mind of a child, and for generations, Greek children have been brought up with these stories. These are the kinds of myths that brought me up. Where we are right now is close to Mount Olympus, the Mount of the Gods, and also close to the town of Vergina, which is directly connected to Alexander the Great. From there, he started his excursions and campaigns and conquered much of the known world. Even closer, where you stayed yesterday and where we'll go tomorrow, is Halkidiki, the area where Aristotle was born. This year has been declared the Aristotle Anniversary Year, since it marks 2,400 years since his birth. But we'll talk about that later on.
So where exactly are we? And how did we end up sitting across from Pyrros Dimas, casually chatting about his childhood in Albania? A few months prior, I received an email from our producer, Debbie Millette, that began, "I have an interesting predicament I have found myself in." That's a dangerous opening. A line like that can be followed by a request for a favor you'd rather not do. And so I was already thinking of possible excuses when I read the next sentences. In short, she'd secured an interview with Dimas but had yet to secure a film crew. Did I know anyone who'd be interested? She wanted to know. And that's more or less how we ended up here. Our home base for the trip was the town of Arnaia. This is the area where the philosopher and scientist Aristotle was born in the 4th century BCE. Arnaia is quiet. The gym where we filmed was in Pylaea near Thessaloniki and was owned by Dimitris Ioannidis, coach for the Greek Paralympic team. I'm still not entirely sure how all these threads are connected, aside from knowing that Dimas is passionate about the Aristotelian area and that he's active in promoting sports of all types to all groups. Dimas's faith in the transformative power of sport comes from lived experience, a point he emphasized when talking about his childhood in Albania.
Κοίτα, γεννηθήκαμε εκεί. Αυτό το κομμάτι της Ελλάδας έμεινε, δόθηκε.
The area where I was born had once been a part of Greece, but then became a part of Albania. Despite this connection, growing up, we didn't know how things were in Greece, as we didn't have the opportunity to see life in Greece. At this time in Albania, it was very difficult to be a Greek. We were not even allowed to talk in Greek outside of the home. We would only speak Greek indoors, around our families. How can I put this? It was a very strict regime. In these very strict times, having weightlifting was a good means to get away from the regime. Only much later, in 1990, did things begin to change.
Ξεκίνησα την άρση βαρών χωρίς να το γνωρίζω ως άθλημα. Από την πρώτη στιγμή το ερωτεύτηκα.
What I do remember is that I started getting involved in the sport without really knowing about it, but I fell in love with it right from the first moment. I remember that first time I had the possibility to train in the gym. I managed to do 120 pounds in the squat, and everyone went crazy over how strong my legs were. It was also, in the beginning, a way to differentiate myself from my brother. In my family, we were two boys. My brother at the time was more into music and played an instrument, while I found my way into sports. So weightlifting was a way to stand out from my brother, since everyone would always compare us. I remember I loved it so much that I would go an hour ahead of the training session, and I would stay late to watch the older lifters. So I would sleep and wake up for the sport.
Θυμάμαι ότι πήγαινε στο γυμναστήριο, μου άρεσε τόσο πολύ που πήγαινε στο γυμναστήριο μία ώρα πριν. Τελείωνα με την προπόνηση, εμείς καθόμουν έβλεπα.
When I started training, my parents said, "Let him try, but we'll see. We'll let him try for 3 months, and then we'll wait and see." My coach at this time was not just a coach, but was like an educator too. He would come to my school to learn about my progress, and every day he would write the day's training with the exercises, the date that I was present, and at the end he would put his signature on this. When my dad would ask, "Where were you today?" I would answer, "In training." But he would continue to ask, so I would show him the training notebook with the coach's signature. So that let my parents feel comfortable that it was a serious task that I was given, and that my coach was interested in my whole development, in my progress in school, and keeping my parents informed, and not just in sport.
Και έβλεπαν και οι γονείς ότι ο προπονητής δεν ενδιαφερόταν μόνο για τον αθλητή για να κάνει άρση βαρών μόνο, ενδιαφερόταν και για τα μαθήματα και για την ενημέρωσή τους. Όλο αυτό το πακέτο είναι σημαντικό για μια οικογένεια.
At this point, Dimas is one of several promising young athletes in southern Albania, and his coach showed similar concern for the other athletes in his care. He'd even check up on the school grades of the older lifters. Things might have proceeded at this pace rather straightforward were it not for 2 fortuitous events that took place right around the same time. Here's the first.
Μετά τα 13, εντάξει, είχα την τύχη να πάω σε ένα σχολείο.
After the age of 13, I was lucky enough to switch schools. The school I had been attending before was damaged that year and had to be demolished. So all the classes from this school had to be moved to another school, and we attended this school in shifts. My group went later in the day. When the morning shift ended, I was given mornings and afternoons free and had school in between. So at the age of 14, I started training both morning and afternoon. But I was lucky enough that my coach at that time could train me in both sessions, and we began a more intensive training program. What I usually say is that there are a lot of naturally talented people around, but that talent without hard work is simply not enough.
Generally, we don't support the demolition of a school, but it seems to have worked out in Dimas's case. But that's something external that took place without Dimas's control, presumably. The second event was more internal and suggests something about the mindset of the teenage Dimas.
Σίγουρα όμως αυτό που
What definitely gave me more of a target and more motivation was when I then came across a magazine of the federation with pictures and stories of Yuri Vardanyan.
The first time I saw Dimas was in 2008 at the World University Championships in Greece. And I go over there and he's like, "You're Vardanyan's son?" And I go, "Yeah." And he's like, "Your father, my favorite." And he told me that, and I'll never forget that. He said, "Your father, my favorite." I knew my father was great, you know, but I didn't know how great he was. For a 3-time Olympic champion to say how great my father was and that my father was his idol.
If Dimas was the hero to a generation of weightlifters in the 90s and early 2000s, Yuri Vardanyan was the hero to the generation just prior. Olympic champion, 7-time world champion, holder of too many records to list here, Yuri Vardanyan is another member of the weightlifting pantheon. To give you an idea of just how dominant he was, when he won the light heavyweight class at the 1980 Games in Moscow, his 400-kilo total would also have won the next two higher weight classes, and it would have given him bronze in the class above them. So yes, this was a good target to aim for.
Yuri Vardanyan was an Olympic champion, the so-called Man of Iron, and was even in the same bodyweight category as me, 82.5 kilograms. When he lifted the bar overhead, he would turn his head left and right, looking around. I saw him winning world championships and the Olympics, so I asked my coach if there was any possibility that I could do this, if I could become an Olympic champion.
Ο πρώτος στόχος μεγάλος, ας πούμε.
What did your coach say?
My coach said, if you work, αν δουλέψεις και αν δουλέψεις σκληρά, μπορείς να πετύχεις τα πάντα. Όλα είναι στο χέρι σου.
My coach said, if you work hard enough, you can achieve everything. Everything depends on you. And that was a seminal moment for me. My whole life changed. Now this was my target. I had friends, but I stopped seeing them. I started paying attention to my food. I started being careful about my diet and my weight. I made sure to avoid getting into trouble or into fights to avoid getting injured, which would have kept me away from the barbell. My life changed completely because this person gave me a vision.
Around this time, 1986, when Dimas is 14 and then 15 years old, is when you start to see the portents of future glory. That year, he won national titles for his age group, youth and then junior, in the 56 and 60 kilogram classes. He was then national champion in the juniors in 1987 in the 67.5 class. At that point, Dimas also began competing in the senior age group despite his youth, with the consent of the Albanian Federation. At the 1988 Senior National Championships, he came in second after Muharrem Berisha, leaving behind 24 other competitors. The following year, at age 17, he won the Senior National Championships in the 82.5 category.
Είχα την τύχη, αυτό που είπα, να έχω έναν προπονητή ο οποίος με παρακολουθούσε, έδινε την ευκαιρία σε όλους, αλλά έβλεπε και ποιος...
I was lucky enough to have a coach who looked after me. Although he gave his athletes equal opportunities, he could also see who really wanted to work. In me, he saw an athlete who wanted to succeed, who wanted more. He saw that I was following this target and that I loved what I was doing. I was sleeping and waking up with weightlifting. My whole life was now weightlifting. Then, at age 17, I was invited to the Albanian national team to lift with them and take part in their competitions. I remember competing at the age of 17 in the men's category and wanting to set a national record. I didn't set the record, but I did come in first in the class. Despite winning the men's class at only the age of 17, I was so disappointed that I didn't set a record that I was ready to quit weightlifting altogether.
Απογοητεύτηκα τόσο πολύ και ήμουν έτοιμος να σταματήσω την άρση βαρών.
In 1989, just shy of his 18th birthday, Pyrros Dimas, lifting for Albania under the name Pyrros Dimas, made his first appearance at the World Championships. Coincidentally, the championships took place in Athens, Greece, the city he would one day call home. Lifting in the 82.5 kilo category, Dimas managed a 152.5 snatch and 187.5 clean and jerk, good for 12th place and a 340 total.
Το 1990
In April 1990, I competed with the Albanian national team for the last time at the European Championships in Denmark. There I lifted 162 and 187 and came in 4th place in Europe in the men's 82.5 kilogram weight class. If I had lifted those weights at the Junior Championships that year, I would have been world champion in my age group. But the Albanian team didn't send me that year. I had traveled to Greece with the Albanian national team even before the borders were opened, as I had competed abroad several times. But the regime in Albania had very specific propaganda against other European nations, and it was all based in fear. We were told that in the rest of Europe people were starving and that they were into drugs, and it was not a good place to live. But when I was in Greece and other European countries, I realized it was all a myth, and that there was freedom of speech and democracy, and people could live well, and most importantly, there was no fear. That was very important. There was no fear of expression, no living in fear. But when I came back to Albania with my team, I would never say these things or feelings of mine. I would keep up with the propaganda of the regime. I would say, yes, this is true, they are starving, this is not a good place to live. Because otherwise, I would have had problems back home. Some of my peer athletes who dared to talk about these issues in public, they would just disappear. Not just from the sport itself. We have never seen them again.
As we'll see next time, the geopolitical situation was about to give the hard-working Dimas another stroke of good luck. Coming up, we'll take a look at his move from Albania to Greece, his development under coach Christos Iakovou, and the formation of the Greek Dream Team in the early to mid-1990s.